everyone, I'm Stephanie and welcome back to So Many Things. Today I have a great little project for you. It's a self-binding crib blanket. Now you can make this in any size that you want. It's actually very, very simple to make. What you're going to need is two opposing fabrics. So something to go into the center and then something as your accent or your solid color around the outside that will also be your backing fabric. You can choose any size that you want. I have chosen to do approximately a 30 by 40 inch blanket to go into a crib. Today I've chosen to do a double-sided minky blanket. So the front of the blanket is a cheater quilt, I think it's called, from Spoonflower, of a great wilderness theme. And the back is a cuddle minky that I purchased from fabric.com. I'll have links, of course, to those down in the description below. So I cut my center panel at, let me just refer to my little sticky, 36 by 38. And then my backing fabric was 34 by 46. We'll get those cut out and then we'll start pinning. I've carefully taken my time to cut these two pieces out. Minky tends to slide and stretch a little, so just taking your time, making sure that you measure many spots to join your line. And I find cutting it with my scissors just takes a little bit of that play out of the equation. So now we're going to take our front piece, so that would be the quilted piece, and we're going to measure a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch square in all four corners. This will be your start and stop point for when you are sewing the front panel to the backing piece. I'm just using a piece of dressmaker's chalk. I find it the easiest to work with, but you can use just about anything. A pen, one of the washable markers. I don't suggest the disappearing ones. I've never had much luck. The line always seems to disappear before I get to sewing that corner. So dressmaker's chalk for me is my go-to. Once you have all four corners marked, then you're going to have to mark the center point of all four corners of your topper piece and also of your backing piece. So just match up your corners, find the center, and then mark it quickly with a pin. So now you have your center marked. The next step is going to be your most time consuming. We're going to have to match up our bigger piece, right sides together, with our front piece. This is only time consuming because we've got to sew one side at a time. So first you're going to match your center pin. So just make sure that they're one on top of the other, and then you can remove one and pin both pieces together. And then you just want to line up your fabric with the top of the minky. Again, same as in the last video that we worked with minky. I can't remember. Lots of pins. I do about 1.5 inches apart, all the way across to where your square is. When working with minky, you're always best to have a walking foot. It is, like I said before, a really slippery material that seems to shift and twist without warning. And A walking foot just eliminates some of that because it has the walker on both the top and the bottom, so it doesn't create any friction for it to twist or turn on you. All right, so I have my top seam stitched up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sew with just a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way across the top. Once I'm done that, I'm going to repeat the same thing on the bottom and then both sides, always making sure to stop at my little square so that I'm not going over it. Those will allow you to create the binding to the blanket once it's complete. Don't forget, on one of the sides, I usually do the bottom, leave about a 2.5 inch opening so that you can turn the blanket once you've done all 4 sides. So once you've gotten I chose to do my 2 short sides, but your first 2 opposite sides done, you're going to think that I'm absolutely crazy because, well, for one, they just didn't line up. And for 2, how are you going to match the other side? The glory of a self-binding quilt is that it will all work out in the end. We're just going to do the same as the other 2 sides. Match up our center seam. And then pin across. Once you get to the end, yes, you will have this extra fabric, but that is actually how we're going to create the mitered edge on the front of the blanket. So don't worry about that. You're doing everything correct. So let's pin across this side, and then I'm going to pin ahead on the other side and get them both sewn up at the same time. I've gone ahead and taken out all the pins. Once you've got that done, what you're going to want to do is, for all 4 corners, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to want to take our inside fabric and just fold it on itself so that it makes a nice little triangular corner. Now, always find, because I make my blankets longer, a little longer than they are wide, sometimes my corners won't come out perfect, and that's okay. As long as your inside fabric is lining up really nice, we're good. You're going to take a ruler after that, and you're going to line up where you stopped your stitches parallel, or 90-degree corner, pardon me, to the fold of the outside fabric. So my ruler has some really nice lines, so I just line them up to the bottom edge of there. I make sure that I can see my stitches here. I'll take my dressmaker's chalk and I'll just draw myself a messy little line right there. Now, because I do my corners all at the same time, even if you're doing them one at a time, I would suggest this as well. Give it a pin so that you know that it's not going to move when you transfer your fabric to the sewing machine or you're working on the other corners. So I'm going to do that again. Lining up my inside fabric, give it a shake, make sure it's laying nice and flat. Again, where my stitches stop, .90 degrees to the bottom of the fabric, draw my line. Once you've gotten these done on all 4 corners, same as everywhere else, standard stitch all the way across. We're back from the sewing machine, and as you can see, I just followed the blue line. Our next step will be to cut off the extra fabric. So you can either use a pair of scissors or your rotary cutter. I always find my rotary cutter is quicker, but if you don't have one, not a big deal. You do want to leave your same seam allowance, so about 1/2 inch, to where you're going to do your cut. And we'll do that on all 4 corners. Once you've got all 4 corners trimmed, here comes the easy part, turning it. Find your hole and just reach in and pull everything out. So at this point, I will find my hole again, and I will just reach in and make sure that I'm pushing out my corners. So we've gone to all the trouble to make these pretty corners. So let's make sure that they stay pretty. So you just want to take a blunt object and poke them out so that they're nice and pretty. So now I take it by the 2 corners and then I just lay it out. I'll actually do it the other way. Fits a little bit better on the table. Then you just want to tweak it. Make sure everything's laying nice and flat. No lumps or bumps. So we're almost finished. All is left to do is close up our hole along with top stitching the blanket so that when it goes through the wash, that the person who's receiving the blanket or yourself, you don't have to fiddle with it to get it nice and flat again. So at this point, just because I know it's going to move when I lift it up and take it to the sewing machine, I pin along my seam. So again, I've made sure everything was nice and flat, and I'm going to just pin all the way around to make sure that my seam stays nice and flat and that this binding that we've created by mitering those corners when we had it inside out stay nice and pretty. Now, if you were working with a flannel or a cotton, you may not have to do this step because we all know that flannel tends to stick to itself quite good. But because we're working with Minky, we're definitely going to have to use a few pins to get it to stay where we want it while we stitch it up. I really do love these, I think they're called cheater quilts. Available through Spoonflower. There's so many different patterns and styles. There's squares, there's triangles, there's octagons. They're so easy to work with, and it gives you like instant pop and flair to your project without the hard work of actually quilting it yourself. So I'll have the link in the description to the Spoonflower website where you can find many of these great prints. All right, so I've got it pinned all the way around. For top stitching, use a slightly longer stitch. It's not for strength at this point, it's just to keep it in place. I'm going to run one stitch as close as I can to the seam, and then the next one I'm going to do about a 1/2 inch over onto my binding piece, to my edge piece. That way I know that if anything happens to go wrong, that I've got that second layer of protection to make sure that everything stays in place. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and sewing along with me today. As always, please like, subscribe, and check out my webpage along with my Facebook page where you can find some of these great products up for sale. Thanks for sewing with me.